President.
Senator from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator James Lankford, for arranging today's event. Mr. President, a winter storm shut down the nation's capital this week, but did anyone notice? Essential government employees showed up to do their jobs while the others enjoyed days off. My telework report revealed that just 6% of workers report in-person full-time. And these bureaucrats are doing anything but working. This is sadly just more business as usual. However, it's a fitting prelude to a much bigger storm that is headed this way that will sweep over this city and forever alter the way it operates. I am, of course, talking about the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Headed up by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, DOGE is putting Washington on notice. Henceforward, every cent being spent will now be scrutinized. All regulations must be justified and continually rejustified using data and outcomes, not just ideology. And the government works for the people, not the other way around. To support these efforts, I am honored to be chairing the Senate DOGE caucus and working to downsize the government, which is why my colleagues and I stand here today. For that, I again want to thank Senator Lankford, a founding member of the caucus, author of his Federal Fumbles, and a true hero to taxpayers for organizing today's discussion. It's a rare occasion for this many senators to assemble on the Senate floor to call for spending cuts. In fact, since my fellow Iowans sent me to the Senate 10 years ago to make the porkers squeal, it's been a very, very lonely fight. In this era of political polarization, Democrats and Republicans still come together in agreement over one issue: living high off the hog. When faced with proposals to trim the fat from Washington's budget, members of Congress from both parties act like Goldilocks. It's always too little or too big, and never just right. But the real make-believe of this fairy tale is that it's impossible to cut spending without causing pain. Most Americans aren't even benefiting in any meaningful way from the hundreds of billions of dollars hidden in our federal budget. In fact, Washington's out-of-control spending has been fanning the flames of inflation over the past 4 years, increasing everyday costs for families all across the country. There's no time to wait for DOGE to get to work, because even being a lame duck isn't slowing down Biden's reckless spending. Biden's binge-buying bureaucrats are being ordered to work overtime, including weekends, to get billions of dollars out the door as quickly as possible before President-elect Trump takes office. At the same time, the outgoing administration is cutting collective bargaining deals with government employee unions, giving bureaucrats the right to stay home from work until, get this, 2029. conveniently after President Trump's term. If federal employees don't want to come back to work, well, you know what? Doge and I are happy to make that dream come true. My New Year's resolution is to put Washington back to work and on a diet. This week, I am reintroducing my bills to drain the swamp by relocating federal agencies and bureaucrats outside Washington. I am also putting forward a plan with $2 trillion in potential savings, which I ask unanimous consent to include in the record. Mr. President, may I include this?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. My proposal includes selling off thousands of vacant and underutilized buildings, auditing the IRS to fire the thousands of employees who owe tens of millions of dollars in unpaid taxes, pulling the plug on Biden's billion-dollar boondoggles for gravy trains that never leave the station and electrical vehicle stations that aren't charging up anything but debt, bagging the swag and propaganda promoting government programs and agencies at a cost of $1.5 billion a year, and changing the composition of coins so we stop losing money, making money. In fact, there's no better example of the cost of government inefficiency. Washington spends 3 cents to produce a penny and 11 cents to produce a nickel. That makes no sense. A penny here, a nickel there. Eventually, these examples all add up to millions, billions, and eventually trillions. The bottom line is that if you can't find waste in Washington, there can only be one reason: you didn't look. Well, folks, I've spent the last decade looking while just about everyone else seems to have been looking the other way until now. While this is a personal issue for me, it should not be a partisan issue. After all, every American benefits from a more efficient government, and everyone loses when tax dollars are wasted. I have worked across the aisle on a number of issues to make Washington more transparent and accountable. So I would invite anyone in this body and everyone who may be watching at home who has ideas to join this conversation and our movement, because DOGE is inevitable. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor back to my colleague. Mr. President, I rise in support of the Laken-Riley Act and ask my fellow colleagues to vote for my amendment, Sarah's Law. Combined, these actions will close the loopholes that for too long have allowed murderers who come here illegally to roam free in our communities and commit more crimes. These 2 young women, Sarah Root and Laken-Riley, and their families deserve justice. And folks, we can make this happen tonight. After all, this is not a partisan fight. I'm honored to have my colleague, Senator Fetterman from the great state of Pennsylvania, co-sponsoring Sarah's Law. The truth is, the border crisis has impacted every state, not just southern border states like Texas and Arizona, but New York, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and yes, folks, even Iowa. The end of this month marks 9 years since Iowans Michelle Root and Scott Root, who I know personally, woke up to every parent's worst nightmare. Their daughter, Sarah, was killed by a drunk driver who was an illegal immigrant. Sarah, a 21-year-old from Council Bluffs, Iowa, had just graduated from Bellevue University in Nebraska with a 4.0 GPA. She was headed home after celebrating this milestone, very important day in her life with her family and friends. In an instant, an illegal immigrant, Edwin Mejia, who was drunk driving with a blood alcohol 3 times the legal limit, struck and killed her. One would think that Sarah's killer would clearly meet Immigration and Customs Enforcement's enforcement priorities. But no. Citing the Obama administration's November 2014 memo, ICE declined to take custody of Mejia. Yes, folks, he had killed a woman, and they declined to take custody of Edwin Mejia, despite his repeated driving offenses and history of skipping court dates. Before the Root family could even lay Sarah to rest in her satin-lined casket in the cold Iowa ground, her murderer had posted bond, never to be seen again and never to face justice. Since then, I have warned repeatedly against the dangers of letting illegal immigrants who have already broken our laws roam the country and continue their lawlessness. A loophole in the law meant Sarah's killer escaped justice. But today we can do something to ensure that no other family has to go through the pain and the grief that Scott and Michelle and Scotty and the rest of their family still feel from that heartbreaking day. My amendment would close the alarming loophole that let Sarah's killer go free. It would simply require ICE to detain illegal immigrants charged with killing or seriously injuring another person so they do not disappear before facing justice. Let's make this a reality today for Sarah's family, for Lakin's family, and for the countless American families we can protect. I thank the gentlelady from Alabama for spearheading this effort to bring justice for our families. Thank you, and I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Thank you, and I want to thank my colleague and great friend as we work on this together. Really appreciate your leadership. Thank you for allowing me to join you on the floor today as we show our support for your bill sanctioning Russia Act of 2025. So thank you, Senator Graham. Folks, last week, President Trump showed the world that American leadership is back. He brought home the last living American hostage, delivering Edan Alexander from Iran-backed Hamas and reuniting him with his family after nearly 600 days. He stood with our partners in the Middle East to strengthen the historic Abraham Accords. And he delivered a strong message to Vladimir Putin: end the war. Today, I stand in support of a sovereign Ukraine and echo the president's call to Putin to stop this bloodbath that never should have happened. This is an issue that not only affects a close partner under siege, but also the strength of the United States of America and the security of the free world. Let's be clear here, folks. China is watching. So is Iran and North Korea. And of course, Vladimir Putin is watching too. They call it the new axis of evil for a reason. Mr. President, I personally witnessed and experienced the growth of the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship when I visited Ukraine in its waning days of Soviet control as part of an agricultural student exchange program. This was in 1989, and I had the privilege of living with a Ukrainian family on a very small collective farm. Now, as we got together, there were a number of us Iowa students on that exchange, and again, it was an agricultural exchange. We came together, each of us with our families, in a group setting, one of the very first nights that we were on that collective. And again, with the premise of an agricultural exchange, we were farming tomatoes, working with the cattle and the hogs, very small collective. We came together and the Ukrainians wanted to ask us questions. So all of us American students, all of us from Iowa, we sat down with our Ukrainian families and we expected to talk about agriculture. Iowa agriculture versus Ukrainian agriculture. And much to my surprise, the first question that came from our Ukrainian counterparts was not about how we raise corn or soybeans in Iowa. It was not about the types of machinery that we used on our farm. But the first question the Ukrainians asked us was, what is it like to be free? What is it like to be an American? Because in 1989, those Ukrainians were living under Soviet socialist rule. They could not travel without having the permission of their government. My family did not have a telephone, and if they wanted to use the collective manager's telephone, they would have somebody listening in on the conversation. They would have to know the purpose of the telephone call, who they were calling, why they needed to make a telephone call. This was 1989, and I learned a lot from that exchange. I saw Ukrainian people that were desperate to break free of socialist economic structures and authoritarian restrictions on freedom of movement, the ability to have your own employment, and on freedom of speech. 2 years later, Ukraine declared its independence from the Soviet Union and broke free. Later, many years later, 2003, the United States is involved in the war in Iraq. I was a soldier in 2003 during Iraqi freedom. So I was a transportation company commander, permanently stationed in Kuwait. My transporters ran convoys from the ports in Kuwait up to Iraq, delivering goods for our warfighters. So I was on a little sub-camp in Kuwait, outside of Camp Arifjan. Half of that sub-camp, called Camden Yards, was occupied by American forces. My soldiers and I lived on that sub-camp. The other half of the camp was occupied by other forces. Those other forces were Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine's not part of NATO. They were not required to support the United States of America in Iraq. But Ukraine, of its own volition, sent their soldiers, and not just as support elements, they were there as combat forces. So again, I was a transporter. We ran convoys in Iraq. The other half of that camp that I lived on, they were Ukrainian engineer forces. They did road clearing. And I think back, how many American lives did those engineers save from their road clearing efforts, clearing bombs so they wouldn't be detonated by my drivers? Ukrainian forces, combat forces. Today, Ukraine is fighting its own war. And I will remind everyone, the United States does not have forces involved in the Russia-Ukraine war. None, zero, none. Today, Ukraine fights not only for its own survival, but for the very principles the United States was founded on. When America leads, the world is safer. When we disengage and when we retreat, like we saw for the last 4 years under the Biden administration, chaos fills the void. Russia's aggression has already cost too many innocent lives, about 5,000 lives every single week. Too many innocent lives, folks, which is why I support President Trump's efforts to get a peace deal done now. Vladimir Putin cannot keep tapping the United States of America along. I vow to keep working with my colleagues to equip the president with all the tools necessary to hold Russia accountable, including sanctioning Russia and its supporters if they continue to drag out these peace talks and carry on with the needless bloodshed. So this war that never should have started can come to an end. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to use a prop during my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Uncle Sam is the nation's largest landlord, yet he will never win a round of Monopoly, the classic board game where players try to make money and avoid going bankrupt by buying, renting, and selling property. That's because Uncle Sam, who is already $37 trillion in debt, refuses to sell off unused and unneeded properties that are costing tens of millions of dollars a year to maintain. Many of Uncle Sam's properties are also fixer-uppers, requiring billions of dollars in much-needed renovations and overdue upgrades, some of which are listed on this board. Holding on to unaffordable properties that are nearly vacant while being just a roll or two away from going bankrupt is not only a losing strategy in monopoly, but also a bad game plan in real life. But Uncle Sam gets away with it because Washington plays by its own set of rules. And no matter how you roll the dice, Washingtonopoly is a losing game for taxpayers. To demonstrate, why don't we go ahead and play around? Okay, that was my attempt to roll the dice. Okay, so 3, we rolled a 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we landed on the Department of Agriculture South Building in Washington, D.C. And guess what, folks? It's owned by good old Uncle Sam. Let's look at the stats for the USDA South Building. 78% of this building isn't even being used on a day-to-day basis. Yet we are paying more than $11 million for utilities every single year. And the building requires $1.7 billion for repairs and upgrades. We could hold on to this property and pay these costs for a nearly empty building, or we could sell it and make $261 million or more. What would you do? Well, Uncle Sam has decided to keep it and is passing along the costs to taxpayers. So let's roll again. Okay, 2, we got 2. Let's see, 1, 2, great. We landed on community chest, so let's pick a card. Community chest. Pay $81 million for unused property. That's right, folks. Every year, Uncle Sam pays out over $81 million maintaining underutilized offices. This includes nearly 7,700 vacant buildings and another 2,265 that are largely empty. No wonder the nonpartisan Public Buildings Reform Board says Washington's, quote, wasteful real estate practices would not endure for so long in a private sector company. But when playing Washingtonopoly, Uncle Sam doesn't pay the cost for his wasteful decisions. You do. How about we take one more turn? 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This time we landed on chance, so we get to pick another card. So there we go, there's our chance card. Pass the For Sale Act and advance to go. Folks, that is exactly the type of chance we need to protect taxpayers. Selling off Uncle Sam's unneeded property has long been tied up by overly restrictive red tape and bureaucratic barriers. To revamp Washington's real estate rules, I introduced the For Sale Act. Passing this bill will put 6 pieces of prime property in the nation's capital on the auction block immediately. Selling just these spots will bring in at least $400 million while also canceling costs, including $2.9 billion in overdue maintenance. This is just the first step in downsizing Uncle Sam's unused, unneeded, and unaffordable real estate holdings. To any interested potential buyers, you can build a house or even a hotel on these properties and earn rent, just like Monopoly. But best of all, taxpayers finally get to advance to go and collect $400 million. That, folks, is how you win the game. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and would note the absence of a quorum. All Americans can take great pride in our nation's generosity that has saved millions of people around the world from starvation and disease. And our government agencies coordinating aid efforts should be eager to share details about how their use of taxpayer money makes the world a better place. Yet over the past decade, USAID repeatedly rebuffed my request for information using intimidation and shell games to hide where money is going, how it's being spent, and why. As a result of my oversight, I learned that the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, is a rogue bureaucracy operating with little accountability and even sometimes at odds with our nation's best interests. What warranted such secrecy and stonewalling? Here's just some of USAID's questionable spending that I uncovered. Money intended to alleviate economic distress in war-torn Ukraine was spent sending models and designers on junkets to New York City and fashion weeks in Paris and London at a cost of more than $203,000. $148,000 went to a pickle maker. A dog collar manufacturer fetched $300,000, and a custom carpet manufacturer collected $2 million. Elsewhere, $20 million was awarded to Sesame Workshop, which produces Sesame Street to create content for Iraq. $2 million went toward promoting get this, folks, promoting tourism to Lebanon, a nation that our very own State Department warns against traveling to due to the risks of terrorism and kidnapping. Yes, folks, $2 million for tourism to Lebanon when we are saying don't travel there. $67,000 was spent to feed edible insects to children in Madagascar. Over $800,000 was sent to China's notorious Wuhan Institute of Virology to collect coronaviruses. What exactly was our International Development Agency developing at China's Wuhan Institute of Virology? Well, if the CIA, the FBI, and other experts are correct that the COVID virus likely originated from a lab leak, USAID may have had a hand in a once-in-a-century pandemic that claimed the lives of millions. There's no shortage of other questionable USAID projects, but President Trump is putting an end to this deep state operation. The foreign assistance programs that do advance American interests are now being administered under the watchful eye of Secretary Marco Rubio. This includes projects previously supported by USAID that were caring for orphans and people living with HIV. Imagine how much more good work like this could be done with the dollars that instead financed fashion shows, supported Sesame Street programs in Iraq, or ended up at China's Wuhan Institute. Overseas projects without merit are being ended, and the tax dollars that we're paying for them will be refunded if the Senate passes the rescissions bill. It also cancels taxpayer subsidies to public broadcasting. Too often, these programs are partisan propaganda, and you don't have to take my word for it. A National Public Radio senior editor recently confessed, and I will quote this editor's words, not mine, quote, "It's true NPR has always had a liberal bent," end quote. He admits the organization has zero Republicans in editorial positions. Come on, folks. Even CNN has Scott Jennings to roast the loony liberal lunatics on that failing network. NPR and PBS have a right to say whatever the heck they want, but they don't have a right to force hardworking Americans to pay for their political propaganda being masked as a public service. Defunding this nonsense is causing a lot of squealing from the big spenders around here. Washington insiders are more upset at this effort to stop wasteful spending than at the misuse of taxpayer dollars. In fact, saving tax money is such a crazy concept in Washington that Democrats are threatening to shut down the entire government if this bill passes. It says a lot about the other side's priorities when they are willing to take hostage funding for veterans and senior citizens to prevent $9 billion in unnecessary waste, fraud, and abuse from being trimmed from our $7 trillion annual budget. The interest that we are paying on our debt alone is costing nearly $3 billion every single day. Every day. If we are ever going to get serious about our debt crisis, Congress needs to pass a rescissions bill like this every single week. Every week. Folks, the simple truth is, if you can't find waste in Washington, it's because you simply are not looking. With our national debt now exceeding $37 trillion, the real question we should be asking isn't why is government spending now being scrutinized, but rather why did it take so long? With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Send as a quorum call.
I ask that we vitiate with a quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to use a prop.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to raise an alarming issue. The Chinese Communist Party is stealing sensitive intellectual property developed using your tax dollars. We are all too familiar with the threat of Chinese espionage. It wasn't too long ago Iowans raised the alarm on Chinese nationals digging up our seeds and stealing our agriculture technology. Just last month, a Navy sailor was convicted after China paid him in exchange for highly classified data about Navy ships. Unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Loopholes in the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs, which help develop critical technologies supporting America's national security, are being exploited by China and other foreign adversaries to steal sensitive technology. Over 40 years ago, the SBIR program was established as America's seed fund to serve as an innovation pipeline to support our warfighters and maintain a technological edge. While the program has seen its fair share of successes, we must be honest that how it currently operates is benefiting China at the expense of our warfighters. This summer, I released a report exposing that hundreds of millions of dollars of technology funded by your taxes through the Pentagon's SBIR program are vulnerable to Chinese espionage. My report found that in 2023 and 2024, 835 applications for SBIR, STTR funding were flagged for having foreign risks. Yet only 303 were denied for their ties to adversaries. Even worse, a lack of foreign due diligence standards across government has opened the door for exploitation. Some agencies denied 100% of flagged applications, while other agencies only denied 1%. Even one case is too many. I shared my report with the Pentagon and asked them to investigate further. The Pentagon agreed with me that there are significant threats to our national security that must be addressed. My Innovate Act does just that by implementing foreign due diligence standards across government to ensure we unleash the golden age in America instead of serving as a subsidy for Beijing. Another defect limiting the effectiveness of the SBIR program is the exploitation of the program by a small number of companies, often called SBIR mills. The program too often serves as a private, taxpayer-funded ATM for these select few businesses. In the past decade, 25 companies in the Pentagon's SBIR program, which is just 0.5% of overall award recipients, received 18% of the funding. That's over $2.3 billion, folks. That is a $92 million windfall for each. No wonder hardworking folks in Iowa have a hard time viewing these as truly small businesses. Even worse, these so-called SBIR mills too often produce nothing more than policy white papers. despite many of their business models being largely dependent on your tax dollars. Folks, as a combat veteran, let me tell you, a white paper is not supporting our war fighters. Our men and women in uniform deserve the best, most innovative technology to protect themselves, defend our nation, and deter our adversaries. But when it comes to protecting and defending us, what do these white papers provide? I suppose we could fold them into paper airplanes. I can't throw it on the floor of the Senate, but you get the drift. Okay? We need to strengthen the program to ensure that SBIR serves a greater role than producing a paper army. The Innovate Act fixes these egregious misuses of taxpayer funds and ensures award dollars go to the best and the brightest entrepreneurs, not grant writers who have learned how to game the system on the taxpayer's dime. My bill will reorient SBIR to its original purpose, providing merit-based support for American innovators. It course corrects the program back to helping true American startups get off the ground. It streamlines the proposal process and establishes a new Phase 1A award to attract new entrants with strong commercialization potential. Lastly, the Innovate Act allows new strategic breakthrough awards of up to $30 million at the Pentagon, DOE, NASA, HHS, and NSF. These awards with required matching funds will move our most promising technologies out of the lab and into production for our warfighters, scientists, and other medical professionals. Time is of the essence. The United States cannot and should not delay these reforms any longer. No more waste. No more giveaways to Beijing. Every dollar must advance innovation that keeps America strong and secure. We must act now to ensure maximum impact of every dollar invested, to secure our edge against our adversaries, and unleash a new golden age for America's small, resourceful innovators. Small businesses everywhere are excited about the Innovate Act and stand ready to deliver the technologies of tomorrow. Let's make that happen. I seek unanimous consent to pass the Innovate Act. Thank you. And with that, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of my bill, which is at the desk. Further, I ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I thank you. Unfortunately, I cannot support the senator from Iowa's proposed legislation. I agree that we must reauthorize the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs before their authorization expires at the end of this month. However, the legislation proposed by the senator from Iowa would decimate American innovation conducted by small businesses and make wholesale changes to the law without proper data, full information, or appropriate vetting. I am opposed to this bill because, one, the best research proposals will not be funded. Two, technologies like the world's smallest heart pump, oxygen delivery systems for military submarines, and technology to improve radiation threat detection in public spaces would not exist if the senator's legislation was the law. Three, Successful, innovative small businesses will be punished solely because they are successful in the program. 4, small businesses will avoid pursuing the riskier, more cutting-edge ideas that keeps American innovation at the forefront, ahead of our rivals in the world. 5, agencies will no longer be able to fund technology that aids their mission if that technology comes from a successful small business. And this is only a fraction of the concerns that not only I have, but the SBIR and STTR communities have raised with me. These programs have gone above and beyond the expectations of those who enacted it. Since the program was established, more than 30,000 small businesses have provided $70 billion in research and development to the United States government. For every SBIR dollar spent, the program returns anywhere from $22 to $33 in economic benefits. These programs work because of the merit-based competition nature of the programs. Darwinian, paranoia-inducing competition. That's what wins. Competition drives the innovation, and meaningful innovation always comes from our most nimble allies, small businesses, not big corporations. It's the small businesses that innovate. And then big companies might want to purchase that breakthrough, but it never comes from those big companies. And that is why in May, I introduced legislation to not only make these successful programs permanent, but further increase their reach and their efficacy. My SBIR STTR Reauthorization Act of 2025 would, 1, make permanent the SBIR and STTR programs, 2, maintain their merit-based competitive nature, 3, increase research funding for small businesses and partnering research institutions, 4, strengthen commercialization efforts, 5, maintain the tough bipartisan foreign due diligence program established by our predecessors, Senators Cardin and Paul, just 3 years ago, which is working. And 6, dismantle barriers to increase participation from underserved populations and new entrants. I am greatly disappointed that we have not been able to come to a bipartisan agreement on how to reauthorize these programs, though my Democratic colleagues and I have continued to show up to negotiate in good faith. However, I am glad that the House Small Business and House Science Committees sensibly came together on a bipartisan, clean, one-year extension for the programs. This extension was unanimously reported out of the House Small Business Committee just yesterday. Should that legislation come to the Senate and the senator from Iowa blocks my reauthorization legislation, I will support the House's one-year extension. It is important that these programs do not face arbitrary, wholesale changes that would weaken American innovation and small businesses' role in it. It is also critical that these programs do not face a lapse in reauthorization, as it would set the program and our innovation ecosystem back by years. Therefore, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard. Senator from Massachusetts.
I ask unanimous consent that the Small Business Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 1573 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, I ask that the bill be considered, read a third time, and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Reserving the right to object. Ranking Member Markey, I continue to want to work with you to find common ground and pass SBIR reauthorization with bipartisan reforms. But the status quo will not work. I will not continue to allow China to win and let our war fighters lose. My Innovate Act will stand up to Beijing, invest in the best and the brightest, and ensure that America maintains our technological advantage. It is irresponsible to put this program on autopilot through a permanent reauthorization, especially without sufficient safeguards to protect taxpayer funds from abuse. Make no mistake, Beijing is clinking their glasses at the thought of the status quo continuing. After all, we are talking about America's national security. I am willing to work with you on any of the reforms on the table in both my bill and in yours to find a common sense solution and one that will work for both sides. However, as the proposal stands, on behalf of our warfighters and our nation's security, I object.
The objection is heard.
And Mr. President, I just want to thank the senator. I'm happy to continue to negotiate with you. Again, in my opinion, a one-year extension gives us the time to do that. But thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Iowa is recognized.
Mr. President, it's day 16 of the Schumer shutdown. During this time, President Trump has been working to guarantee that our troops get paid, ensure women and children continue receiving food assistance, and end the conflict in the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Democrats continue holding the government hostage. As a result, air traffic controller shortages are causing flight delays, and some rural airports in Iowa may soon be forced to suspend operations. Seniors have lost access to some health services. The FDA is unable to process new drug and medical device applications, delaying the availability of new medical products. And Senator Schumer is taking pride in his shutdown, claiming, quote, "Every day gets better for us," end quote. Who is this us that it's getting better for? Because I know my folks back home really don't appreciate that attitude. Only a Washington politician would delight in causing such dysfunction. And while Congress will be paid for failing to do its job, many essential government employees who have continued to work through this shutdown will likely miss their next paycheck. The president is ensuring our troops get paid this week, a move that is being protested by some Democrats. Now, my daughter serves on active duty. She is a young Army officer. She had to sit down and counsel her troops last week on where they could go to get loans so they could make their obligated payments. So thank you, President Trump, for taking care of my daughter and her soldiers. Meanwhile, 750,000 non-essential government employees who haven't worked at all in these past weeks will be paid for doing nothing. It costs $400 million every workday to provide back pay to those that are furloughed during Schumer's shutdown. As of today, the price tag to pay non-essential bureaucrats not to work is $4.8 billion. $4.8 billion. Taxpayers should all be asking, why is Washington spending money on anyone or anything that is non-essential? President Trump is permanently eliminating many of these non-essential positions as part of a reduction in force, or RIF. So here are some of my suggestions for getting rid of the riffraff with a riff. First up, eliminate the positions of federal employees and contractors who weren't even working before the government shutdown. While millions of Americans have 2 or more jobs to make ends meet, these federal employees aren't working at all. There are dozens of national laboratory employees with nothing to do who spend the workday catnapping or playing cards and games. To pass time, one of them started journaling. One of his entries reads, quote, "Did nothing all day today, over 10 hours in here." The following day he wrote, quote, "I do hope to play another good game of chess." They're not the only ones with nothing to do. A Department of Energy contractor actually filed a complaint that he was getting paid for work he wasn't doing. So good on him, at least he's honest. For years, he and his co-workers have been spending their time looking for things to do, watching Netflix and taking naps. He says he is, quote, "begging for work," adding, "I can't believe I'm getting paid to do nothing." If federal employees can't even justify their own salary, how can anyone else? I've also uncovered bureaucrats who are holding several different government jobs simultaneously, but aren't doing any of them. For example, a full-time HUD employee was being paid for 2 other full-time, got this, folks? Okay, she was being paid for 2 other full-time government contractor jobs. So that's 3 full-time jobs in total. She frequently billed taxpayers for working more than 24 hours in a single day. Gosh, if I could find more than 24 hours in a day, that would be pretty extraordinary. But this woman was paid $225,000 for hours she never worked in nearly 3 years. 3 full-time jobs, people, not working any of them. This isn't an isolated case either. I've introduced my Double Dippers Act to cross-check paychecks and payrolls to identify and stop bureaucrats from double billing taxpayers for work they're not even doing. Okay, don't laugh. This is true here. There are plenty of other non-essential jobs that can be eliminated immediately, beginning with the multitude of gimmicky government mascots. I'm not talking about Smokey the Bear, okay, not talking about Smokey the Bear, but rather the other costume characters you've probably never even heard of, like the National Park Service's Lupe the Ringtail, who is so frightening that Lupe makes children cry. Owlie Skywarn. Oh, I'm sure you've all heard of Owlie Skywarn with the National Weather Service. Another Park Service mascot, Riley the Roadrunner. Puddles the Blue Goose with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And everybody's favorite, Franklin the Fair Market Fox from HUD. I say let's furlough these fur balls forever. Tax dollars should never be spent paying for any of these do-nothing jobs, especially when there are severe staffing shortages for critical jobs like air traffic controllers and VA health care providers. The folks who are working these important jobs are too often overworked, understaffed, and underappreciated. So these folks can go. I commend all of those essential workers who are doing the jobs that we need done on a daily basis. They continue to answer the call of duty during the Schumer shutdown without knowing when they may receive their next paycheck. Thank you for putting your country first, and on behalf of my fellow Iowans, I also would like to extend from them a very hearty thank you. And to those who have been collecting paychecks without even working, even before this shutdown began, all I can really say is thanks for nothing. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. President?
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to use a prop during my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, legend has it that the halls of the Capitol are haunted by a demon cat. If you look closely, paw prints left behind by this stray spirit can be spotted outside the entrance of the old Supreme Court chamber. From poltergeists to apparitions of Abraham Lincoln and other dead presidents, Washington has a long history of ghost stories. The city itself was transformed into a ghost town when government workers disappeared from their desks as a result of President Biden's lax telework policies. For years, most agency headquarters were left with just a skeleton crew. Even after the bureaucrats were called back to work by President Trump, before being furloughed by the government shutdown, the buildings remained largely empty. Thousands of other government buildings are completely vacant. Thousands are uninhabited by a single soul in Washington, D.C. Deserted and left in a state of disrepair for years, many properties have been condemned to a fate worse than death. One was described as a roach-infested mold dungeon. Bugs were spotted crawling out of faucets and creeping across the floors of another. While some have been described as cold, gray eyesores, others are literally death traps. The drinking water in many sat stagnant for so long that it turned into a deadly potion of toxic metals and biohazards. Renovations and upgrades to make the horrifying offices habitable again would cost the taxpayers, and prepare yourself for a jump scare, $370 billion. Yes, folks, that's billion with a B. I just don't know what possesses Washington to hold on to decaying properties. Meanwhile, around the country, other old haunts are returning from beyond the grave. But there's no reason to fear this zombie apocalypse. It's that time of year when boarded up businesses come back to life as Spirit Halloween stores. It's almost spooky how fast these Halloween stores pop up, transforming the remains of abandoned buildings into a billion-dollar business. Spirit Halloween's successful body-snatching business model scares up a great idea for reviving the government's graveyard of lifeless real estate. Let's sell off these haunted houses to businesses who can breathe new life into them. That trick would be a real treat for the taxpayers because it would both reduce costs and bring in billions of dollars from monstrous sales. It's an idea only a zombie wouldn't like, since it's such a no-brainer. My Disposal Act would fast-track the sale of unused, unneeded, and underutilized government properties. Congress should embrace the Halloween spirit by passing this bill and let the unfurling of spirit Halloween banners begin. Many of the properties that would be put on the market by my bill are in prime locations, so potential buyers should be prepared to act quickly before these once-in-a-lifetime sales vanish like a ghost. The real monster this bill is designed to slay, however, is one that has been lurking around Washington for way too long: our national debt, which now exceeds $38 trillion. That amount should scare us all into taking action. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, as I visit with farmers traveling river to river across Iowa, I hear all too often about the crushing weight of healthcare costs on farm families. The Unaffordable Care Act's one-size-fits-none model ignored the realities of self-employment, seasonal cash flow, and the absence of large corporate employers in farm country. Spouses, who are often a family farm's bookkeeper, mechanic, veterinarian, many, many jobs all rolled into one, have been forced to take off-farm jobs solely to latch onto employer-sponsored coverage. Now, this is what has happened in my own farm family. My brother and my sister are both type 1 diabetics. Both of them have had to find jobs off of the farm for employer-sponsored health care. That means 40 to 60 hours a week away from the very enterprise they're trying to preserve for the next generation. Democrats in Congress branded Obamacare as a chance to bend the cost curve downward. It turns out the only thing it's bending downward are the bottom lines of farmers across Iowa. And the numbers don't lie. Farmers and small businesses are subsidizing a broken system that doesn't serve them. Rural America needs solutions that don't force spouses to find off-farm work or forego health insurance altogether. Premiums are climbing for individuals and small businesses alike, thanks to the Unaffordable Care Act's mountain of mandates. And now, what we are seeing in this DC bubble is that Democrats want to hand out another $35 billion next year straight to the insurance companies with zero guardrails on fraud or income. In other words, Democrats refuse to reopen the government because they want more welfare for the wealthy. It's clear Obamacare has failed to deliver on its promises. I remember President Obama saying way back in the day that Obamacare would drive down the cost of insurance for every family by $2,500 a year. If that were true, we wouldn't be in this situation today. Obamacare has failed to deliver on its promises. The answer isn't pouring more taxpayer cash into a broken system, throwing good money after bad. What we need to do is fix what's broken. President Trump is already working to bring down costs. Instead of extending failed Obamacare and preserving fraud, we can end the waste, return billions of dollars to the taxpayers, and let folks choose from quality options. This is one way we can put patients first. So a number of my colleagues have addressed the shutdown situation as well. And I'm going to veer off on another topic of those federal employees, those air traffic controllers, and for heaven's sakes, our military members that are struggling under this shutdown. Now, many of our military families already rely on SNAP to provide food for their families. We have 1,900 Iowa Army National Guardsmen that are serving across the Middle East today. They are deployed. They have left their civilian employment only to go into a deployed situation where they don't know if or when they will get their next paycheck. Their families in Iowa are struggling right now. They are out there serving for all of us. My daughter is also a soldier in the Army. And at the beginning of the government shutdown, she had the really awful position of having to sit down with her soldiers and counsel them on where they could go to find loans to help their families during the government shutdown. Many of the employees here have had to do the exact same thing. What does it take to get through this government shutdown? It's a simple yes vote from our friends across the aisle. They have shut the government down. We have provided opportunity time and time again to open the federal government, to pay our federal government workers, to make sure our skies are safe, to make sure our military members are paid, to make sure SNAP benefits are getting to every family that struggles with food insecurity. All it takes is a yes vote. We have told the Democrats we are willing to sit down and negotiate on the ACA, the Unaffordable Care Act, and other opportunities. We will do that when we open the federal government. Democrats are not fighting to lower premiums. They are fighting to raise the profits for health insurance companies. Democrats are terrified of the truth about their temporary COVID credits. It's welfare for the wealthy and corporate welfare rolled all into one. Democrats are demanding that Republicans vote to make their handout scheme permanent. Their plan is to line the pockets of health insurers with $500 billion in taxpayer-funded subsidies. Thanks to Democrats, insurers are pocketing record profits fueled by taxpayer subsidies. Extending the Biden COVID credits would cost our taxpayers $500 billion. Democrats shut down the government to protect Obamacare's subsidies that send $40 billion to insurance companies, not to the families that need it. So let's be very clear. This argument is not about helping the American families that need better options to health care insurance. It is about sending large wads of money to health insurers. Let's come together and figure this out, folks. We are the United States Senate. We are the U.S. government. This never would have been allowed to happen when I was serving in the United States military. You come up with courses of action, you decide on the best course of action, and you follow through in that mission. We expect our service members to do this every single day. They are at the behest of the United States federal government. We need to open up the federal government, ensure they are paid. Let's take care of their families. Let's take care of the food insecure folks, not just in Iowa, but all across the nation. Let's make sure our farmers are able to make their farm payments this fall. All it takes is a simple yes from our Democratic friends. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.